All right, we're back after that. I had to take a few days off after watching that that last segment of the board meeting where Stovall heaped this lovely praise on the Trimet management, and Warner said, "Oh, we're just misunderstood. We just need to do better." I mean, it's enough to make you want to puke. Really, that's how. Well, it's hard watching these. I've said it over and over. I gave up watching these for a long time because you're watching a circus of shit show. They're spoon feeding you information that they want you to hear, and there's no objectivity at all in this. Now we're going to go to their public records person. What's her name? Akamito, who I've dealt with in the past, and more or less cordial, I guess. I mean, they never like dealing with me because they have a grudge against me, all of them over there. But before we start listening to this, my pal Seattle Joe, aka Joe Kunstler, wanted me to talk about the records request for the one of the incidents that happened recently. I mean, there's so many incidents you can't even keep track of them. And Trimet refused. It says exempt from public records. They don't. Trimet in Oregon and Portland. I read a study. Some nonprofit or group did an evaluation of all the states' transparency and how they were, and they were rated from A to F on transparency. And Oregon scored a D. They didn't fail, but they scored a D. Texas was ahead of Oregon for transparency. So Oregon and Trimet are not transparent. These are not transparent governments here. They do what they can to hide information from the public. And that includes all of these incidents like the stabbings and the slashings and the attacks. And you'll never see videos coming from Portland Trimet of any actual incidents like we see from all around the country. We see actual buses crashing into houses, for crying out loud, and you see the passengers falling out of their seats, and you can hear them talking amongst themselves. But we'll never see anything like that from Portland Trimet, and that's because Portland Trimet is not a transparent organization, even though, of course, they claim they are. But we already know when we're listening to Trimet board, Trimet managers, Trimet officials, they've been very well schooled in making sure they only say what makes them look good. They don't ever talk badly about anything. So this is not something to be exposed. It's well known that the Trimet is not transparent. I've talked about this many times. It doesn't matter what I say. I have no influence. It doesn't matter what anybody says. Nobody has any influence. You can't change this. The Portland area government is a closed club, and all of the people in it are connected. So you can't get through there. And we have a complacent media who doesn't fight for these records. They're corporate media, and Trimet is corporate government. So there's no real news media in Portland. Okay, there's no investigations of Trimet. The last one that they actually had was a Joe Rose story when McFarland stole that raise after cutting our benefits and raising fares and all of that stuff he did to the public, and at the same time he secretly gave himself a raise. And he got away with it, okay, because that's how it works in Portland, okay? They run the show, we don't. All people like me can do is observe. So let's get on to what she's going to say. I'm sure, I already know what it is. It's going to be all, we're great and we're transparent and blah, blah, and we can all laugh because we know they're liars.
Today, I get to not only provide a review of 2016, but provide you with a brief mid-year glimpse into 2017 as well. So improving access to Trimet records is part of the agency's overall commitment to transparency and accountability. In 2011, 2 years before the Secretary of State's audit and the adoption of Trimet's accountability policy, we had already begun to look at ways to improve transparency by improving the management of our public records.
Okay, I haven't seen, I don't watch the board meetings before I come. I'm watching them at the same time as anybody else here. This is so far it's been exactly as I would expect. We were improving this in 2011, and before the Secretary of State demanded we did that. For those of you who don't remember that phony whitewash audit, that was Kate Brown. Uh, that was ordered because McFarland gave himself the secret raise. And they waited a whole year with standard government operating procedure. Don't do anything. Hopefully, by the time we release the report, everybody will have forgotten. You have to remember one thing when it comes to government. They're in the business of manipulating minds. They're not in the business of being honest. They're in the business of manipulating minds. Just like corporations, they're in the business of manipulating your mind. That's what all the advertising is. It's manipulating our minds. We're 24 hours a day. Our minds are being manipulated. We don't have any freedom of thought anymore. We've been completely brainwashed by all of this stuff around us. So the audit was ordered because of McFarland's raise, and after a year they issued the report. They didn't even address McFarland's raise. It wasn't even in there. What they did say was that the union workers are getting too much benefits. So, I mean, it was a complete whitewash farce, but they did make a transparency center, which is not that bad, actually. It's okay. And they also forced them to start recording these board meetings, which me and Jason McHuff were doing before, okay? These board meetings were brought to the public by two bloggers without any influence, which should have been humiliating for these bozos at Trimet. We did it for years before they did it. Anyway, let's continue listening to her crap.
And making the process more accessible to the public. So one way we did that was to make it easier for the public to submit their requests electronically. First, by providing a fillable PDF form, which could be sent to a dedicated email account. And then in 2012, we launched an online public records request form, which is now available via our Transparency and Accountability Center.
And credit where credit is due, that is a very good feature. You can actually go over there and see all of the public records requests, and all the ones that are important have next to them exempt from public disclosure. But you can see who's asking for what. So that's a good thing.
These days, the vast majority of our requests they come through our online form. Once completed, the request is routed directly to our dedicated email inbox, which is checked by staff each business day. Our web portal also includes an online log that enables requesters to check on the status of their requests. And the data that populates this log comes from a database that we implemented in 2012 to better track our incoming requests. Going too fast. The data is uploaded at the end of each workday, and then it's pushed out to our website at midnight, so the log is always kept current. The data that I have, or the statistics that I have for you today, come from this database and provide an insight into the volume and types of requests we receive, and also our responsiveness to those requests over the past 5 years. So when we began tracking requests in 2012, we had about 500 that year. In 2016, we had 641 requests, which is close to a 30% increase over that 5-year period. This works out to approximately 12 requests coming in each week. Now, when I presented the 2015 year in review, Director Isman asked for an apples-to-apples comparison of comparable transit agencies outside of Oregon, because last year I provided just some statistics for local jurisdictions like Metro and the Port of Portland, just to give a basis of comparison. So for this year, we sent inquiries out to the West Coast 11 and received statistics from all but the UTA, which began tracking their own public records requests this year.
For those of you that don't know, the UTA, the Utah Transit, is one of the most corrupt in the country. They got caught, they had money going to all their cronies. They were taking huge salaries. It was Steve Banta. You remember Steve, who was a friend of mine? He was down in Phoenix, and he was taking all kinds of liberties with the transportation dollars, because public transportation is the last pork barrel, and people don't realize the pork barrel part of this whole thing, which is why all of the districts around the country want these projects, because it's a pork barrel to them. UTA is very corrupt, and I'm not sure what's going on there now, but I know the legislature over there was taking some kind of action against them.
At first glance, DART had the most requests by far at 879. We were sort of curious as to why they had significantly more requests than the other agencies. So we followed up with staff and found that 60% of those requests were directed to DART Transit Police. DART, unlike TriMet, has its own Transit Police division, so they handle those police requests directly. That is something that we do not. So if we were to
And TriMet doesn't do that, and that's a way to be unaccountable. They have a contract. They have the police working for the police, but they're paying their salaries under the TriMet budget, even though they're the police. And TriMet doesn't supervise those people, in case you didn't know. I mean, they can request, like, Supporta requested the transit police go and arrest Lane Jensen, a harmless nobody. 3 transit police came and arrested him. I mean, TriMet officials can get them to do things, but they're not supervised by TriMet, and therefore there's no accountability for them at all. Okay, and that's part of the issue that people were bringing up to that deaf, dumb, and blind TriMet board, is the lack of accountability. Of course, anything you say to the board goes nowhere.
move the DART police request to make it more comparable, that will put us on par with San Diego MTA, at the top with the most requests received in 2016. So that was volume. Here are the distinct categories of requests that we typically receive. Litigation claims and contract related requests make up the bulk of our routine identifiable requests, and we saw increases in both those categories, particularly with contracts, which rose by 31%. Media requests were down by 26%, but I suspect they'll go back up this year. And we also saw a slight decrease in union-related requests. All other requests that don't fit into those definable categories are lumped into a general category, and these can be quite varied. Examples would include requests from Lyft customers for their ride records, requests for passenger census data, and also a mishmash of requests for records related to TriMet projects and programs. General video requests. These are the ones that are not related to routine claims or litigation. These continue to rise and represented 1 in every 4 requests that we received in 2016. The majority of these requests were security related. So for instance, someone might ask for video, hoping to catch the culprit, the person who used their stolen credit card perhaps to buy TriMet fare. Now, if the person has filed a police report, our security department will work directly with police and will forward any video evidence that they may find directly to the investigating officer.
So in other words, they won't release it to the public. They'll only release it to the police. So that's a fail.
We are still also seeing an increase in requests for what we term witness video. These are requests that don't involve TriMet at all, but are made because our cameras may have captured an incident that is of personal interest to the requester. The vast majority of these typically involve motor vehicle accidents between cars that are not TriMet owned and are typically made by insurance companies. Other requests for witness video are quite varied. For instance, this past year we received a request for video from any TriMet bus that passed by the requester's front lawn. Sometime during the 6 hours of footage, her lawnmower went missing, and she was hoping that one of our cameras captured the person who took it. Unfortunately, her request was not timely, so we no longer had the data from the date in question. We also received a request for video from someone who got a tip that Theo, their missing Chihuahua, made an appearance on one of our buses. This is Theo,
That's what that was. Okay.
and this is not Theo. Unfortunately, the Chihuahua on the bus was not the missing dog. Sad to say. We really did want to help reunite a beloved pet with their owner, but as with most requests for witness video, it ended up being a bit of a wild goose chase. And on a side note, I happened to see that this flyer up recently. Theo is still missing, so if anyone sees him, please call their owner. So during my last board update, President Warner asked if maybe putting down together or nailing down a policy as to when video is available and when it is not may help to curb these types of requests. Our records governance policy does address records retention requirements under Oregon Public Records Law. And the primary purpose of surveillance video is to help us anticipate, monitor, and prevent possible criminal activities. So we apply the records retention requirements for crime analysis records to the raw data and keep it until superseded. Generally on board, so vehicle video is kept or available for 72 hours, and fixed video is typically available for 14 days before that raw data is overridden. Let me see. Our public records request policy, which is available on our website and on our form, does warn people that this type of data is time sensitive. So if we receive a request for video during that window of time, we'll process it as a public records request. But if the request is not timely, we'll no longer have that data, and thus we'll no longer have responsive video. When we do receive a request, it is logged into our public records request database and then assigned to staff. And from there, one of the first steps in the process is to acknowledge it. By law, public agencies are required to acknowledge the receipt of a written request as soon as practicable and without unreasonable delay. Last year,
As soon as practical and without unreasonable delay, which is the same as saying whenever you feel like it. See, laws like that, regulations like that don't mean anything because there's no timeline attached to that. That's just bullshit. That's another bullshit government rule. As soon as possible, without any intentional delay. It doesn't mean anything unless they say within a day or within 2 days. It means nothing. And you see loads of regulations like this that are just open-ended and don't mean shit.
99% of all requests we received were acknowledged within 1 to 3 business days, with over half acknowledged the same day that the request was received. From there, staff will begin working on TriMet's response to the request. This chart shows the final outcome of requests received in 2016. We provided records and completed nearly 2/3 of all incoming requests. In 14%, the requests received, the requester either declined or was non-responsive, did not follow up on the request. In 13%, we didn't have responsive records. The next outcome relates to exemptions. Public records law provides specific exemptions which may restrict the release of records. In that instance, we'll conduct a measured case-by-case analysis to determine whether an exemption applies. But in most instances, we're able to complete the request by redacting the exempt material and releasing the remainder. But in some instances, the record as a whole is exempt from disclosure, and so in that instance, we'll decline to release it. And as you can see from here, those represented only 6% of requests received last year.
And that 6% of denials are the most crucial ones. Those are the incidents on the max, the crashes, the attacks. You know, they never released any of that. I'm sure she's not going to go into any of that because, you know, she wants to gloss it over. But, you know, it all sounds good on paper, but if you're not releasing the most vital information, then you got a problem.
Finally, a small amount of requests is logged as closed other, and these are those various requests where the record may have been produced via some other avenue, for instance, through our media department. Oregon Public Records Law authorizes public agencies to establish fees that are reasonably calculated to reimburse it for its actual cost of making records available. However, we've granted an automatic fee waiver for requests under $10 for the past about 5 years now. This enables us to process requests more quickly and also avoid processing fees that exceed the cost of the request. Last year, we provided records free of charge in nearly 62% of all completed requests, which was an increase of nearly 8% over last year. Oregon Public Records Law requires public bodies to provide proper and reasonable opportunities to inspect its records. The Oregon Attorney General advises that how quickly a public agency can reasonably make non-exempt records available will depend on various factors, though in the usual case, it should be possible to make requested records available within 10 working days. So using this as a baseline, we produced records within 10 working days in close to 2/3 of all completed requests last year. And here's a breakdown of the records that we provided within 10 working days. Of the 408 completed requests, over a third were produced either on the same or on the next business day.
That's sure news to me and all the people I know that have requested records. None of them. First of all, we didn't get fee waivers, and second of all, they didn't come in that quick. I had to wait weeks. Well, of course, it's me, and when it comes to me, they're going to do everything they can to screw me up.
Another third of completed requests records were produced after 11 or more business days. The Attorney General does acknowledge that in some cases, more time, even significantly more time, may be required to respond to a request. Requests can be delayed for various reasons, and here are the most common ones. We receive requests that are complex in nature, so these may involve trade secret or legal reviews that take time to complete, or they may involve multiple staff across the agency and or multi-part requests. For instance, we recently received a request that contains 16 subparts, so it can take time to address some of those more complicated ones. We also receive vague requests that require clarification that is sometimes never received. So for instance, we once received a request for, I need to know my card and banking details. Wasn't quite sure how to answer that, and I don't think the requester ever got back to us with clarification. There may be delays in payment, and sometimes a requester is just not responsive. Typically, if we don't hear back from a requester after 30 days, we'll close the request and send a letter that sometimes reminds the requester that they have a pending request, and they'll ask us to reopen it. But by that time, the request is already over 30 days old. There may also be timing issues. For instance, a request for records, the records may not be available at that time, but will become available at a known future date. So in that instance, we'll keep the request open until it can be fulfilled. And finally, there are internal delays. When we contact staff to collect records, we know we're competing for limited resources, particularly where there are other high priority initiatives, such as our recent Morrison-Yamhill Max Improvement project. We're cognizant that public records is not their primary duty, but we still strive to be as timely as possible with our limited resources. And plus, we've become really good at sending reminders and being general pests, so we'll get it done. So that was 2016. We're almost midway through 2017, so I thought I'd provide a brief preview of how things are going thus far. As of the end of May, we had 293 requests. The same time last year, we had 291, so we're slightly ahead of schedule. Here's a breakdown of the general categories. They're still holding, give or take, a percentage or two. Video requests that were unrelated to routine claims or litigation are about 1 in 5 right now, and of the 167 requests that were completed as of the end of May, 65% were provided free of charge, up 3% from last year, so we're off to a pretty good start. So SB 481, which the governor signed last Tuesday, establishes, among other things, new timeframes for responding to public records requests. And if I may say so, I think TriMet does a pretty decent job at responding to requests, but it's always good to hear that from others as well. Last fall, journalist Michael Anderson made a request for passenger census data, which we were able to provide that day and at no cost. And when he received the records, he kindly issued this tweet. So, although I, and maybe at least one other reporter, thinks that TriMet does a pretty decent job at responding to public records requests, we can all...
I love the way they put Michael Anderson up there, you know, a highly respected reporter, journalist in the Portland area. He says it's the best he's done in 15 years. In other words, it took you 15 years to get it right. That's what he's saying there.
Always do better. We'll continue to strive towards transparency not only through our public records process, but also through the advancement of our Records Governance Initiative, which I presented to the board this past March. The goal of that initiative is to improve the overall governance of all of our records and information assets, and thereby also improve our ability to respond to public records requests. We plan to launch Phase 3 this fall, and we'll be resuming our inquiry into technological solutions. So I look forward to providing an update on both the Records Governance Initiative and on public records in 2018. Are there any questions?
It all sounds very lovely on paper, and look at how great job we're doing, and la-di-da, la-di-da. But like I said earlier, you will never see a video like this coming from TriMet.
That white SUV came right into the path of the bus, and the force caused it to push 50 feet. Then the bus plowed through a brick wall. The view now inside the bus shows the driver thrown from his seat. Police say that 18-year-old driver of the SUV ran a stop sign. 5 people were hurt.